The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, walked slowly through the corridors that had once been home to Princess Diana. The silence was almost sacred here, broken only by the soft clicking of her heels against the polished marble floor. Today was different from her usual visits to the palace. Today, she had been invited by King Charles III himself to view some of the royal jewelry collection that had belonged to his late first wife. Catherine had always felt a strange connection to Diana, though they had never met. The weight of following in the footsteps of the people's princess was something she carried with her every day. Public comparisons were inevitable, and while Catherine had found her own path within the royal family, she understood the significance of Diana's legacy and the delicate nature of her position as William's wife. The jewelry room was located in a section of the palace that few people ever saw. As Catherine approached the heavy oak door, she noticed how her heart rate had quickened. She had worn many pieces from the royal collection over the years, but this was different. These weren't just crown jewels or state pieces. These were personal items that had adorned Diana during some of the most memorable moments of her life. Lady Margaret Thornbury, the elderly keeper of the royal jewelry, greeted Catherine with a warm but respectful smile. Margaret had served the royal family for over 4 decades and had personally assisted Diana with her jewelry choices throughout her marriage to Charles. Her eyes held memories that spanned generations of royal women, and Catherine could see the weight of those experiences in her gentle expression. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said with a slight curtsy, "His Majesty thought you might appreciate seeing some of the pieces that Princess Diana cherished most." He felt it was time these beautiful items were shared with someone who would understand their significance. Catherine nodded, feeling both honored and nervous about the responsibility. She followed Margaret into the room, which was lined with glass cases containing some of the most exquisite jewelry she had ever seen. Each piece seemed to tell a story, reflecting light not just from the carefully positioned spotlights, but from the memories they held. "These were her favorites," Margaret explained, gesturing toward a particular case. Princess Diana had such a keen eye for jewelry that complemented her natural beauty. She wasn't interested in the most expensive pieces necessarily, but rather those that spoke to her personally. As they moved through the room, Margaret shared stories about Diana's preferences. She loved sapphires because they matched her eyes. She preferred pieces that weren't too heavy because she would often lean down to speak with children during her charity work. She had a particular fondness for pearls, finding them both elegant and appropriate for daytime events. Catherine listened intently, absorbing every detail. She had studied Diana's style extensively when she first joined the royal family, but hearing these intimate details from someone who had known her personally added layers of understanding she hadn't possessed before. "There's one piece in particular," Margaret said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "that I believe His Majesty specifically wanted you to see today." She led Catherine to a case that sat slightly apart from the others, positioned near a window where the morning light could showcase its contents. Inside the case lay a necklace that took Catherine's breath away. It was elegant yet bold, featuring a stunning arrangement of diamonds and sapphires that seemed to dance with captured light. The centerpiece was a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds, with smaller matching stones creating an intricate pattern that flowed gracefully along what would have been Diana's neckline. "This was created especially for Princess Diana," Margaret explained, her voice filled with reverence. "It was a gift from His Majesty during the early years of their marriage, designed to complement her engagement ring. She wore it to several state dinners and on their tour of Australia. It became one of her signature pieces." Catherine stared at the necklace, imagining Diana wearing it. She could almost see the young princess, radiant and hopeful, adorned with these very jewels during what must have been happier times in her marriage. The thought brought a mixture of sadness and wonder. "Would you like to see it more closely?" Margaret asked gently. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. "Is that permitted?" Margaret smiled knowingly. His Majesty was quite specific in his instructions. He said that if you showed interest in any particular piece, I was to allow you to examine it properly. With careful hands, Margaret opened the case and lifted the necklace. Even in the soft morning light, the jewels seemed to possess an inner fire. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with each stone perfectly placed to create maximum brilliance while maintaining an overall sense of harmony and grace. The sapphires came from Kashmir, Margaret noted as she held the necklace up for Catherine to see. They're considered among the finest in the world. The diamonds are from the royal collection, some dating back several centuries. When it was designed, the jewelers wanted to create something that honored both tradition and modernity. Catherine reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering just inches from the necklace. There was something almost magnetic about it, as if the piece itself was drawing her closer. She thought about Diana wearing this very necklace, about the occasions it had graced, about the photographs that must exist of it adorning the princess's neck. Princess Diana always said that jewelry should enhance the woman, not overpower her, Margaret continued. This piece was perfect for her because it was substantial enough for formal occasions, but the design was so elegant that it never seemed to wear her. As Catherine listened, she found herself thinking about her own relationship with royal jewelry. She had always approached it with respect and careful consideration, understanding that each piece she wore would be photographed and analyzed. But Diana seemed to have possessed a natural ease with these extraordinary pieces, wearing them as if they were simply beautiful accessories rather than priceless historical artifacts. There's something else about this particular necklace, Margaret said, glancing toward the door as if checking that they were still alone. Princess Diana wore it on what turned out to be one of the last formal occasions she attended with Prince Charles before their separation. It was at a charity gala for one of her favorite causes. The photographs from that evening show her looking absolutely radiant. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. The necklace suddenly seemed to carry even more weight than its considerable precious stones. It had witnessed the end of an era, had been present during what must have been an emotionally complex evening for Diana. I can see why His Majesty thought I should see this piece, Catherine said softly. It's absolutely magnificent, but more than that, it represents such an important part of royal history. Margaret nodded approvingly. You understand exactly what I mean. It's not just about the beauty of the jewels, though they are certainly spectacular. It's about the woman who wore them and the grace she brought to everything she touched. The room fell into a comfortable silence as both women gazed at the necklace. Catherine found herself wondering about Diana's thoughts during those formal occasions. Did she feel the weight of expectation as she fastened these jewels around her neck? Did she think about the photographers waiting outside, ready to capture every angle of her appearance? Or had she simply focused on the causes she was supporting and the people she would meet? Your Royal Highness, Margaret said eventually. His Majesty mentioned that if any piece particularly spoke to you today, he would be honored for you to wear it to appropriate occasions in the future. These jewels were meant to be worn, not simply admired in cases. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. The thought of actually wearing Diana's necklace was both thrilling and terrifying. It would be an incredible honor, but also an enormous responsibility. She would be continuing the story of this remarkable piece, adding her own chapter to its history. That's an extraordinary gesture, Catherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I would need to consider it very carefully. Wearing something so personal to Diana feels like a privilege that shouldn't be taken lightly. Margaret smiled warmly. That response tells me everything I need to know about why His Majesty thought you were the right person to see these pieces today. Princess Diana would have appreciated your thoughtfulness. As they continued to examine the necklace, Catherine noticed details that hadn't been visible from a distance. The setting was incredibly intricate, with tiny diamonds creating delicate patterns between the larger stones. The chain itself was a work of art, with links that had been crafted to complement the overall design, while ensuring the piece would lie perfectly against the wearer's neck. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, Catherine observed. Every element has been considered so carefully. Princess Diana was very involved in the design process, Margaret revealed. She had strong opinions about how she wanted it to look and feel. She insisted that it should be comfortable enough to wear for hours at formal events, but also striking enough to photograph beautifully. Catherine could imagine Diana working with the jewelers, expressing her vision for this piece. It spoke to the princess's practical nature as well as her aesthetic sense. Even in something as formal as royal jewelry, Diana had found ways to ensure functionality alongside beauty. The morning was progressing, and Catherine knew she would soon need to leave for her next appointment. But she found herself reluctant to walk away from this necklace and the stories it contained. There was something almost hypnotic about the way the sapphires caught the light, creating flashes of deep blue that reminded her of ocean depths. "Margaret," Catherine said finally, "would it be possible for me to hold it? Just for a moment?" Margaret glanced around the room once more, then nodded. "I believe that would be exactly what His Majesty had in mind when he arranged this visit." With infinite care, Margaret placed the necklace in Catherine's hands. The weight was substantial, but not uncomfortable. The metal was cool against her palms, and she could feel the intricate textures of the settings and chain links. For a moment, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to wear such a magnificent piece. When she opened her eyes, Catherine found herself looking directly into Margaret's knowing gaze. The older woman had clearly witnessed this moment many times before with different pieces and different royal women, but her expression suggested that this particular instance held special significance. "It suits you beautifully, even just holding it," Margaret said softly. "Princess Diana had long, graceful neck, and I can see that you share that attribute. The proportions would be perfect." Catherine looked down at the necklace in her hands, imagining it against her collarbone. She thought about the occasions where such a piece might be appropriate, about the causes she could support while wearing it, about the continuation of Diana's legacy that it might represent. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside broke the spell of the moment. Both women turned toward the door, and Catherine carefully handed the necklace back to Margaret. As the keeper of the jewelry began to return it to its case, the door opened, and a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. King Charles III stood silently for a moment, taking in the scene before him. His eyes moved from Catherine to the necklace in Margaret's hands, and something shifted in his expression. The room suddenly felt charged with an energy that hadn't been present moments before, as if the past had suddenly collided with the present in ways none of them had fully anticipated. Charles stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the sapphire and diamond necklace that Margaret was carefully placing back into its velvet-lined case. The sight of it brought back a flood of memories that he had thought were safely buried beneath years of carefully constructed emotional distance. He remembered the day he had commissioned this particular piece, remembered the excitement in Diana's eyes when she first saw it, and, most painfully, he remembered the last time she had worn it. "Your Majesty," Margaret said quickly, offering a curtsy. "Her Royal Highness has been examining the pieces as you requested." She was particularly drawn to this necklace. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. Being discovered holding Diana's jewelry felt somehow inappropriate, though she knew Charles himself had arranged this viewing. She watched his face carefully, trying to read the complex emotions that seemed to be playing across his features. "I see," Charles said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that Catherine couldn't quite identify. He stepped further into the room, his hands clasped behind his back in the formal posture she had seen him adopt countless times during official functions. "And what did you think of it, Catherine?" The question seemed simple enough, but Catherine sensed layers of meaning beneath it. This wasn't just a casual inquiry about her opinion of a piece of jewelry. This was something much more personal and potentially fraught with emotional landmines. "It's absolutely exquisite," Catherine replied carefully. "The craftsmanship is remarkable, and Margaret has been telling me about Princess Diana's involvement in its design. It's clearly a piece that was created with great care and personal attention." Charles nodded slowly, moving closer to the case. His eyes lingered on the necklace, and Catherine noticed a slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was working to maintain his composure. She had learned to read these subtle signs during her years in the royal family, understanding that public figures often had to manage private emotions in public spaces. Diana did indeed have very specific ideas about this piece, Charles said, his voice taking on a distant quality. She wanted something that would photograph well for the charity events she was so passionate about, but also something that would feel authentically hers rather than simply borrowed from the Crown collection. Margaret tactfully busied herself with adjusting other pieces in nearby cases, giving the family members space to navigate what was clearly becoming a more personal conversation. Catherine appreciated the older woman's diplomatic instincts, but she also felt suddenly very alone with Charles and the weight of the memories that this necklace seemed to carry. She wore it beautifully, Catherine said softly, hoping to offer something positive without overstepping boundaries she wasn't even sure she understood. Charles turned to look at her directly for the first time since entering the room. His expression was unreadable, a careful mask that Catherine had seen him wear during difficult public moments. But his eyes held something deeper, something that spoke to pain that had never fully healed despite the passage of years. Yes, she did, he agreed. Diana had a remarkable ability to make even the most formal pieces seem natural and effortless. It was a gift that I never fully appreciated at the time. The admission hung in the air between them, more personal than anything Charles had ever shared with Catherine about his first marriage. She felt the privilege and burden of this moment, understanding that she was being trusted with emotions that the king rarely allowed anyone to see. Margaret mentioned that you might be willing to have pieces from this collection worn again, Catherine said carefully. That's an incredibly generous gesture. Charles was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the necklace. Catherine could see him weighing his words, struggling with feelings that were clearly more complex than he had anticipated when he arranged this viewing. When someone dies, Charles said finally, their possessions can become almost sacred. For years, I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else wearing Diana's jewelry. It felt like a violation of her memory, as if allowing these pieces to live again might somehow diminish what they had meant to her. Catherine nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. She thought about her own precious possessions, about how devastating it would be to see them worn by someone else after she was gone. The personal nature of jewelry, especially pieces chosen for important occasions, made them more than mere accessories. But I've come to realize, Charles continued, that keeping beautiful things locked away doesn't honor anyone's memory. Diana loved these pieces because they allowed her to feel confident and beautiful while supporting causes that mattered to her. Keeping them hidden serves no purpose except to preserve my own complicated feelings about the past. The honesty in his voice surprised Catherine. She had grown accustomed to Charles's formal public persona, but this glimpse of his private struggle with grief and regret felt like a gift of trust that she needed to handle with extreme care. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to make decisions about such personal items, Catherine said. Your willingness to share them shows tremendous grace. Charles smiled slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen from him since he entered the room. You're very diplomatic, Catherine. But I suspect you understand that my motives aren't entirely selfless. Seeing these pieces worn and appreciated again might help me find some peace with memories that have been challenging to process. The admission was startling in its vulnerability. Catherine had never heard Charles speak so openly about his personal struggles, particularly regarding his relationship with Diana. She felt honored by his trust, but also acutely aware of the responsibility it placed on her. This particular necklace, Charles said, moving closer to the case again, represents both some of my happiest memories and some of my deepest regrets. I commissioned it during a time when I thought Diana and I might find our way to genuine happiness together. She was so excited when she first saw the design sketches, so involved in every detail of its creation. Catherine could imagine the young Diana, full of hope and enthusiasm, working with jewelers to bring this vision to life. The thought made the necklace seem even more precious, and the responsibility of potentially wearing it even more significant. But by the time it was completed, Charles continued, his voice growing quieter. Our relationship was already beginning to show the strains that would eventually destroy it. Some of the last photographs of us together as a happy couple feature Diana wearing this necklace. The pain in his voice was unmistakable now. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched this proud man grapple with memories that still clearly had the power to hurt him decades later. She understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary and private. I remember the evening she wore it to that last charity gala, Charles said, his eyes distant with memory. She looked absolutely radiant, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. We both knew by then that our marriage was effectively over, but we were still trying to maintain the facade for the sake of duty and the monarchy. Catherine remained silent, understanding that Charles needed to speak these memories aloud, perhaps for the first time. She felt the weight of being his audience for this confession, but she also sensed that her presence was somehow necessary for him to finally voice these long-held feelings. "When I saw you holding it just now," Charles said, turning back to Catherine, "for just a moment, it was as if time had collapsed. Diana was young when she wore this necklace, not much older than you are now. Seeing it in hands that might wear it again brought back so many feelings I thought I had resolved." Catherine felt her breath catch. The comparison to Diana was something she had lived with since the beginning of her relationship with William, but hearing it from Charles in this context felt both meaningful and overwhelming. "I hope I haven't overstepped by examining it so closely," Catherine said. "I wouldn't want to cause any discomfort or bring up painful memories." Charles shook his head firmly. "Quite the opposite. Seeing your appreciation for its beauty and understanding of its significance tells me that Diana's jewelry would be in good hands. She would have wanted these pieces to continue bringing joy and confidence to someone who could wear them with dignity." The endorsement felt like both a blessing and an enormous responsibility. Catherine thought about the public scrutiny that would accompany wearing such a recognizable piece, about the inevitable comparisons and analysis that would follow any appearance featuring Diana's jewelry. "There's something else I need you to understand," Charles said, his tone becoming more serious. "If you choose to wear any of these pieces, there will be reactions. Some people will see it as appropriate and touching. Others will view it as presumptuous or inappropriate. You'll need to be prepared for both responses." Catherine nodded, having considered exactly these possibilities. Public reaction to anything involving Diana was always intense and often divided. Wearing her jewelry would be interpreted through countless different lenses, many of them political or emotional rather than simply aesthetic. "I've thought about that," Catherine replied. "Any decision to wear something so personally significant to Princess Diana would need to be made very carefully, with consideration for all the different ways it might be received." Charles studied her face, seeming to evaluate her readiness for the scrutiny such a decision would bring. Catherine met his gaze steadily, trying to convey both her respect for Diana's memory and her understanding of the complexities involved. "William should be part of any such decision," Charles said finally. "These pieces belong to his mother, and his feelings about seeing them worn again should be the primary consideration." The mention of William brought another layer of complexity to Catherine's mind. Her husband had his own complicated relationship with his mother's memory and possessions. She knew he struggled with wanting to honor Diana while also protecting his own emotional well-being and that of their children. "Of course," Catherine agreed. "Nothing like this would ever be decided without his full support and comfort with the choice." Charles nodded approvingly. "I've been thinking about this for some time. Actually, William has mentioned that he wishes his children could have some connection to their grandmother beyond photographs and stories. Perhaps seeing her jewelry worn with love and respect might be one way to keep her memory alive for them in a positive way." The idea of George, Charlotte, and Louis seeing their grandmother's jewelry as a living part of family history rather than museum pieces locked away was deeply appealing to Catherine. She thought about how Diana would have wanted to be remembered by her grandchildren, and she suspected it would be as a vibrant presence rather than a distant figure from the past. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Catherine said, "creating connections across generations through meaningful objects." As they continued to discuss the various considerations and complexities, Catherine became increasingly aware of how much Charles needed to have this conversation. She realized that her presence here today wasn't just about viewing jewelry or considering future wearing opportunities. It was about Charles finding a way to make peace with his past while creating possibilities for healing and connection in the present. The morning light had shifted, casting different shadows across the jewelry cases and highlighting different aspects of the necklace that had started this entire conversation. Catherine looked at it again, seeing not just its beauty, but the layers of human emotion and history it contained. Margaret had retreated to the far end of the jewelry room, giving Charles and Catherine space for their increasingly personal conversation, but she remained close enough to assist if needed. The experienced keeper of royal treasures had witnessed many emotionally charged moments over the decades, but there was something particularly poignant about watching the king confront his feelings about Diana's jewelry while considering its future. Charles moved closer to the case containing the necklace, his hands still clasped behind his back in that familiar formal posture. But Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had become slightly more measured as he worked to maintain his composure while discussing such difficult memories. "There's something I need to tell you about the last time Diana wore this necklace," Charles said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Something I've never spoken about to anyone, not even William." Catherine felt her heart rate increase. The weight of being trusted with such a private confidence was overwhelming. But she sensed that Charles needed to share this burden with someone who could understand its significance. "The charity gala where she wore it for the last time," Charles continued. "We had argued terribly beforehand. It was about the children, about custody arrangements, about how we would handle the public announcement of our separation. I said things that I've regretted every day since." He paused, his eyes fixed on the sapphire centerpiece of the necklace, as if it held the power to transport him back to that evening. Catherine remained perfectly still, understanding that any movement or sound might break the spell that was allowing Charles to finally voice these long-held regrets. Diana was in her dressing room, putting on this necklace, and I came in to discuss some last-minute details about our public appearance that evening. We needed to present a united front for the photographers, despite everything that was falling apart between us privately. But instead of focusing on the task at hand, I found myself watching her in the mirror as she fastened the clasp. Charles's voice carried a mixture of pain and wonder as he recalled the scene. Catherine could imagine the tension of that moment, the complexity of still finding someone beautiful even as your relationship with them was dissolving. "She looked absolutely luminous," Charles admitted. "Even in the midst of all our problems, even knowing that our marriage was effectively over, I was struck by how stunning she looked in that necklace. It complemented her coloring perfectly, caught the light in a way that made her skin seem to glow. For just a moment, I remembered why I had fallen in love with her in the first place." Catherine felt tears threatening as she listened to this raw confession. The humanity in Charles's voice, the vulnerability of admitting that he had still found his estranged wife beautiful even as their world crumbled around them, touched her deeply. But instead of telling her how beautiful she looked, Charles continued, his voice thick with regret. "I made some cutting remark about the cost of the necklace and how it might be better to auction it for charity, given our circumstances. It was cruel and unnecessary, born out of my own pain and frustration, but it hurt her terribly." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decades-old guilt. Catherine could see how this moment had haunted Charles, how the memory of causing Diana pain at a time when she was already vulnerable had eaten away at him over the years. "I can still see the expression on her face," Charles said, his voice barely a whisper. The way her joy in wearing something beautiful was instantly replaced by hurt and disappointment. She didn't say anything in response, just finished fastening the necklace and walked past me out of the room. But I knew I had taken something away from her that I could never give back. Catherine found herself thinking about all the times she had worn royal jewelry, about the confidence and sense of connection to history that the right piece could provide. To have that feeling destroyed by cruel words from someone whose opinion mattered would have been devastating. That evening at the gala, Charles continued, Diana was absolutely radiant in public. She chatted with donors, posed for photographs, gave a beautiful speech about the charity's work. No one looking at her would have guessed that anything was wrong. But I knew that every time she moved and felt the weight of that necklace, she was remembering my harsh words. The image of Diana maintaining her public composure while privately nursing fresh emotional wounds was heartbreaking. Catherine thought about the strength it must have taken to smile for cameras and engage with supporters while carrying such personal pain. I've thought about that evening countless times over the years, Charles said. I've wondered what might have been different if I had chosen kindness over cruelty in that moment. Not that it would have saved our marriage, but perhaps it would have allowed us to part with more grace and less bitterness. Catherine understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary. Charles had spent decades learning to manage his public image, to present himself as a measured and controlled monarch. This raw honesty about his failures and regrets showed a side of him that very few people had ever seen. When Diana died, Charles continued, his voice breaking slightly, one of my deepest regrets was that I never had the chance to apologize for that moment, and so many others like it. The necklace was returned to the royal collection with her other jewelry, but every time I've seen it since, I've been reminded of my failure to be kind when kindness cost nothing, but might have meant everything. The pain in his voice was so evident that Catherine felt compelled to speak, despite understanding that this confession wasn't really about seeking comfort from her. Your Majesty, we all have moments we wish we could handle differently. The fact that you recognize the impact of your words shows tremendous growth and self-awareness. Charles looked at her with surprise, as if he had forgotten she was there during his journey into painful memories. You're very kind, Catherine, but some regrets can't be softened by understanding or good intentions after the fact. Perhaps not, Catherine replied gently, but they can inform how we choose to act going forward. Your willingness to share Diana's jewelry, to allow these pieces to bring joy again, seems like a way of honoring her memory with the kindness that you wish you had shown more consistently then. Charles considered her words, and Catherine could see something shift in his expression. The idea that present actions might serve as a form of belated amends seemed to resonate with him. I suppose that's part of why I wanted you to see these pieces today, Charles said slowly. Diana deserves to be remembered for her beauty, her grace, her charitable work, and her love for William and Harry. These jewels were part of her story during some of her happiest moments, and they shouldn't remain forever associated only with the pain of our failed marriage. Catherine nodded, beginning to understand the full complexity of what Charles was offering. This wasn't just about allowing her to wear beautiful jewelry. It was about creating new, positive associations for pieces that had become tainted by difficult memories. If I were to wear this necklace, Catherine said carefully, I would want to wear it in a way that honors Princess Diana's memory and continues her legacy of supporting important causes. It should be about continuing her story, not replacing it. Charles's eyes lit up with something that looked like relief. That's exactly what I hoped you would understand. Diana's jewelry should serve the same purposes it served when she wore it, supporting charities and causes that make a real difference in people's lives. The conversation was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Margaret looked toward the door with a knowing expression, and Catherine realized that someone else must be approaching. The keeper of the royal jewelry had clearly anticipated this possibility. That will be Prince William, Margaret said quietly. His Royal Highness asked to be notified when Your Majesty's meeting with the Princess of Wales had reached a suitable point for him to join the conversation. Catherine felt her stomach flutter with nerves. William's feelings about his mother's jewelry were complex and deeply personal. She had no idea how he would react to finding her examining Diana's necklace or to his father's suggestion that she might wear it in the future. Charles straightened his posture and seemed to gather himself, shifting back into a more formal demeanor as the footsteps grew closer. But Catherine could still see the emotional exhaustion in his eyes from having shared such difficult memories. The door opened, and William entered with the measured stride Catherine knew well. His eyes immediately went to the open jewelry case and the necklace that was still visible within it. His expression was unreadable, but Catherine noticed a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was managing his own complex emotions. "Father," William said with a formal nod. "Catherine." His greeting to her was warmer, but still carried an undertone of curiosity about what he had walked into. "William," Charles replied, "Catherine has been examining some of your mother's jewelry, and we've been discussing the possibility of these pieces being worn again for appropriate occasions." William's gaze moved from his father to Catherine and then to the necklace. The silence stretched for several moments as he processed what he was seeing and what it might mean. "That's the sapphire and diamond necklace," William said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Mother wore it to several important events. I remember it from photographs." Catherine watched William's face carefully, trying to read his feelings about seeing his mother's jewelry being considered for future wear. She knew how protective he was of Diana's memory, and how carefully he guarded his own emotional connection to his mother's possessions. "Yes," Charles said quietly. "It was one of her favorites, and one that I thought Catherine might appreciate seeing." William stepped closer to the case, his eyes fixed on the necklace with an intensity that suggested he was seeing more than just jewelry. Catherine realized he was probably remembering his mother wearing it, perhaps recalling specific occasions or photographs from his childhood. "It's beautiful," William said finally. "Mother always looked incredible in it." He turned to look at Catherine directly. "What do you think of it?" The question felt like a test, though Catherine wasn't sure what the right answer might be. She decided that honesty was her only option. "It's absolutely magnificent," she said. "But more than that, it represents such an important part of your mother's story. I feel honored to have been able to see it, but also very aware of how significant it is to your family's history." William nodded slowly, seeming to consider her words. Catherine could see him working through his own feelings about the possibility of his mother's jewelry being worn again, weighing his protective instincts against other considerations she couldn't fully understand. The room had become charged with emotional undercurrents that none of them was fully addressing directly. Charles's guilt about his past treatment of Diana, Catherine's desire to honor the princess's memory while serving her own role in the royal family, and William's complex relationship with his mother's possessions all swirled together in the space around the beautiful necklace that had started this entire conversation. William approached the jewelry case slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. Catherine could see the internal struggle playing across his features as he looked at the necklace that had adorned his mother during some of the most memorable moments of her public life. The weight of family history, personal grief, and the complexity of moving forward while honoring the past was evident in every line of his body. "I've been thinking about this for months," William said quietly, his voice directed toward the necklace rather than to either Catherine or his father. "About what Mother would want for her jewelry, about whether keeping these pieces locked away really serves her memory or our family." Charles and Catherine remained silent, understanding that William needed to work through his thoughts aloud. Margaret had positioned herself even more discreetly in the background, recognizing the deeply personal nature of the conversation taking place. "When Mother died," William continued, "I was angry about so many things. Angry that she was gone, angry about the circumstances of her death, angry that Harry and I would grow up without her guidance. Part of me wanted to preserve everything exactly as she had left it, as if keeping her possessions untouched might somehow keep her memory more alive." Catherine felt her heart ache for the young boy who had lost his mother so tragically and publicly. She thought about her own children and how devastating it would be for them to face such a loss, especially under the intense scrutiny that had surrounded Diana's death. "But I've come to realize," William said, turning to look at Catherine directly, "that Mother's jewelry was never really about the jewelry itself. It was about what wearing these pieces allowed her to accomplish. The confidence they gave her, the way they helped her represent our family and the monarchy, the platforms they provided for supporting the causes she cared about." Catherine nodded, beginning to understand the shift in William's thinking. "She used them as tools for good," she said softly. "Exactly," William agreed. "Mother didn't collect jewelry for the sake of having beautiful things. She wore pieces that would photograph well, that would draw attention to the charities she was supporting, that would help her feel confident when she was representing our family at important events." Charles had been listening intently, and Catherine could see relief beginning to replace the tension in his posture. William's perspective seemed to be aligning with his father's evolving thoughts about the future of Diana's jewelry. "There's something else," William said, his voice becoming stronger and more decisive. "Catherine, you've spent years finding your own way within our family, creating your own identity while respecting the traditions and expectations that come with your role. Mother would have admired that balance." The comparison to Diana was one that Catherine had heard many times from the press and public, but hearing it from William in this context felt different. It was an acknowledgement not just of surface similarities, but of shared values and approaches to royal duty. "I've watched you choose your jewelry carefully for events," William continued. "You understand that every piece will be photographed and analyzed, that your choices send messages about respect for tradition, support for causes, and your understanding of your role." Mother had that same thoughtful approach. Catherine felt tears threaten as she realized what William might be leading toward. The possibility that he would support her wearing Diana's jewelry was something she had hardly dared to hope for, knowing how precious his mother's memory was to him. "If you were to wear this necklace," William said, reaching out to touch the glass case gently, "it would need to be for the right reasons and on the right occasions. It couldn't be about making a fashion statement or drawing attention to yourself. It would need to be about continuing Mother's work in some meaningful way." Catherine nodded emphatically. "I completely agree. Any decision to wear something so significant would need to be made very carefully, with full consideration for how it might honor Princess Diana's legacy." But she also thought about the positive message it might send about continuity, family unity, and ongoing commitment to charitable work. "The symbolism would be powerful," Charles said quietly. Diana fighting homelessness, Catherine continuing that work while wearing Diana's jewelry. It would send a message about the monarchy's continued commitment to addressing social issues. William nodded, and it would show that Mother's memory lives on not just in photographs and documentaries, but in active, ongoing work to help people. That's how she would want to be remembered. Margaret stepped forward slightly, her years of experience with royal protocol guiding her intervention. "If I may suggest," she said diplomatically, "perhaps Her Royal Highness might try the necklace on today, just to see how it feels and looks. Sometimes the reality of wearing a piece is different from simply admiring it in a case." Catherine looked from William to Charles, seeking permission for something that still felt almost too significant to attempt. The idea of actually wearing Diana's necklace, even just for a few moments in private, seemed to cross a threshold from theoretical possibility to concrete reality. "I think that's an excellent idea," Charles said. "Catherine, would you be comfortable trying on?" Catherine's heart was racing as she nodded. Margaret began the careful process of removing the necklace from its case, handling it with the reverence due to both its monetary value and its emotional significance. The jewelry seemed to catch the morning light differently as it was lifted free from its velvet nest. "May I assist you?" Margaret asked, moving to stand behind Catherine. Catherine lifted her hair away from her neck and felt the cool weight of the metal against her skin as Margaret fastened the clasp. The sensation was both foreign and somehow natural, as if the piece had been designed specifically for her proportions. She could feel the substantial presence of the sapphires and diamonds without finding the weight uncomfortable. William and Charles watched silently as Catherine turned to face them, wearing Diana's necklace. The transformation was remarkable. The deep blue of the sapphires brought out the color of Catherine's eyes, while the diamonds seemed to reflect the natural glow of her skin. The proportions were indeed perfect, as Margaret had predicted. "It's extraordinary," William said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "You look absolutely beautiful, Catherine, but more than that, you look like yourself wearing it. It doesn't overwhelm you or make you seem like you're playing dress-up in someone else's jewelry." Catherine moved to the mirror that Margaret had positioned for such occasions. Seeing herself wearing Diana's necklace was an emotional shock. She looked elegant and confident, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with wearing something so historically and personally significant. "How does it feel?" Charles asked gently. "It feels like an honor," Catherine replied honestly, "but also like a huge responsibility. I can see why Princess Diana loved it. It's beautifully designed and incredibly well-crafted. But knowing its history, knowing that she wore it during some of her most important moments, makes it feel almost sacred." Charles's eyes had grown misty as he watched Catherine in the necklace. "You look radiant," he said quietly. "Diana would be pleased to see her jewelry worn with such grace and understanding of its significance." William moved closer to his wife, reaching out to gently touch one of the diamond elements. "Mother always said that jewelry should enhance the woman wearing it, never compete with her natural beauty. This piece does exactly that for you." Catherine could see in a mirror how the three of them looked standing together, connected by this piece of jewelry that bridged past and present, loss and hope, difficult memories and new possibilities. The necklace seemed to have created a moment of healing that none of them had fully anticipated. "If we decide to move forward with this," Williams said, "we'll need to prepare for the public reaction. There will be intense media coverage, analysis of every photograph, commentary from royal experts and Diana supporters. Some of it will be positive, some will be critical." Catherine nodded, having considered exactly these challenges. "I understand that, and I want to be sure that our decision is made for the right reasons, not influenced by fear of criticism or desire for positive attention. The fact that you're thinking about it that way tells me you're the right person to make this choice," Charles said. Diana faced similar scrutiny with every public appearance, and she learned to focus on the causes she was supporting rather than the commentary about her choices. As Catherine continued to look at herself in the mirror, she began to envision herself wearing the necklace to the homeless youth charity gala. She could imagine the photographs that would be taken, the message that would be sent about family unity and continued commitment to Diana's causes, the way the jewelry might help draw attention and support to important work. "I think Mother would love the idea of this necklace being worn to support homeless young people," Williams said. "She spent so much time working with that population, and she always said that fancy jewelry should serve a purpose beyond just looking beautiful." The decision seemed to be crystallizing around them, though Catherine knew there would be many more conversations and careful planning before she actually wore the necklace in public. The emotional breakthrough they had experienced in this room would need to be translated into practical decisions about timing, messaging, and preparation for public reaction. "Should we plan to meet again before making any final decisions?" Catherine asked. "I want to be absolutely certain that everyone is comfortable with moving forward." Charles and William exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes about their shared feelings and concerns. Margaret quietly began preparing to help Catherine remove the necklace, understanding that this first wearing had served its purpose of helping everyone envision the possibilities. "I think we should," William agreed. "But, Catherine, I want you to know that seeing you wear Mother's necklace today has given me a sense of peace that I didn't expect. It feels like a way of keeping her memory alive while also moving forward as a family." As Margaret carefully lifted the necklace away from Catherine's neck, Charles spoke quietly. "Diana's jewelry was meant to be worn and admired, not hidden away. Today has helped me understand that allowing these pieces to live again in the hands of someone who understands their significance might be the most fitting tribute we could offer to her memory." The room fell into a thoughtful silence as the necklace was returned to its case. But something fundamental had shifted during their time together. The jewelry was no longer just a collection of precious objects from the past. It had become a bridge to the future, a way of honoring Diana while allowing her legacy to continue in new and meaningful ways. Catherine knew that wearing Diana's necklace would be one of the most significant decisions of her royal life. But standing in that room with William and Charles, having shared such honest emotions and seen such possibilities for healing, she felt ready to take on that responsibility with all the grace and dignity that Diana's memory deserved.